Hi everybody and welcome to another exciting edition of Boring JavaScript. I'm your host, the Virtuoid, aka Mike Smith, and today we're going to be talking about web components. Web components are ways that you can create your own custom HTML elements that hides the CSS, the JavaScript, and the HTML implementation from the rest of your web page. Now, why is this important? Let's do a quick example. Suppose I have a page with three DOM elements on it, and the green DOM element uses a class called my-background to define a green background. But suppose that my application decides I'm going to change my-background to red. Well, the second that happens, then the green DOM element is going to change its background color to red. And that's not what we're looking for. So what we'll do is we'll change that into a web component. And by using what's called a shadow DOM, which we'll explain when we get to the application, it will hide the CSS, the JavaScript, and the HTML from the rest of the web page. So that when we change the my-background to red, it may change it everywhere else in the application, but it will not touch the web component. And the reason why, again, is that the shadow DOM within the web component encapsulates and hides the CSS, the JavaScript, and the HTML from the rest of the web page. You want to see how it works? Let's get started. First of all, let's take a look at what we want to accomplish. Now, I have a web page here that has displayed 9 of my animals in my zoo that whenever I click on one of the arrows here, gives me a very quick little description of what that particular animal is, whether it's the horse or the dog or the coyote or the dolphin and so on and so forth and all that. So let's take a look at the code that creates that. First of all, here's the index.html. It's no big deal here. I just got a simple little animal list here, which means I'm doing everything within JavaScript. So when I click into JavaScript, here's my listing of all my animals. This is the template that I was using for drawing out what you saw on the screen there. And then the build animal list is the code that will create dynamically the HTML that I'm going to need to be able to put all that information onto the web page. And it's real simple here. There's the spans, there's the headers, there's the articles. Here's where I actually add it to the div, and then I just flip through each one of the animals to add them in one at a time. Then we get the animal list, we build it, pass in the animals in the animal list, and we process the click. And when we click, it determines which particular animal it has been clicked on based upon the event target. And then if we actually have clicked on an animal, because we can click outside the animal, so I want to make sure that I'm clicking on the correct animal, we either collapse it or expand the article depending upon what's been clicked. I mean, that's pretty much it. It works like a champ. I click on Moby Dick, or I can click on Wile E. Coyote, or click on Fluffy. All that works like a champ. And the CSS itself is actually fairly easy too. Here's the animal CSS. Here's the header itself. Here's the header when it is collapsed, and here's the animal. Here is the span type. I've made the text in the middle not quite bold. Here's something for the article. Here's what happens when we hide the article. Here's the toggle for the span. So this is very simple. And everybody in your company loves it. It's great. They think it's the greatest thing since sliced bread. You got a huge promotion. Everything is working great. You got that corner office. Your life is wonderful. Well, somebody comes along and says, I've got another animal within my application on a completely separate page, and I need to do something to that. Let's add this to our CSS. So this is for a completely another web page, because you're sharing the same style sheets here. So this is in a completely different web page. They need the animal color to be green. They need the font size to be 2 rem, and the background color to be completely white. Oh, and it looks beautiful on their web page. But then you get over to your web page, and what happens? Well, let's find out. Let's do a Control F5. And yipes! Everything blows up. Now, why did it blow up? Well, it's because your CSS is basically global. Your CSS that you defined is not specific enough to your particular design here, so that other people can by accident can destroy what you have done. So basically, you're at the mercy, if you're not very, very careful with your specifications, you're at the mercy of what other people could do. Web components can help fix that, because a web component allows you to create a custom component inside what's called a shadow DOM. And the shadow DOM says, okay, I've got my own set of CSS, my own set of HTML, my own set of JavaScript, and I'm not going to allow anything from the outside to be able to filter on the inside. And I'm not going to have anything on the inside to filter out to the outside. It's completely self-contained HTML element. Now, there are a few exceptions, which I'll cover in just a second, but for the most part, Web Component is going to be able to solve this particular problem for you. Let's see how that works. Let's now take a look on how Web Components can fix the problem from the previous session. So I have my new code up on the screen here, and as you can tell, it works exactly the same as before, but now each one of these is inside of a web component. So let me show you what that actually looks like. Let's go over to our code. And let's first of all take a look at our web component JavaScript file. Well, that's it. There's nothing here, basically. I've still got the build animal list, and I'm building out the animal, but instead of having that large, let's go back to the other code here. Instead of having all this right here to build up the HTML one at a time, I'm now passing all that HTML to a web component called VirtualWhiteAnimal. And I'm passing the name and the type and the description. And if we scroll up, and then of course we end the tag right there. So now instead of having all that information that we had before, here it's now down to just VirtualWhiteAnimal. And then I get the animal list, I build the animal list, and then there's nothing else. Well, over here, we're doing the processing arrow click. Where is that? Well, that arrow click is inside the web component. So that's now been moved to the web component itself. So notice that the first advantage you're going to see here is that your code is a lot easier to understand. Hey, I'm now adding a VirtualWhiteAnimal, and that's it. Whatever VirtualWhiteAnimal wants to do for itself, I couldn't care less. All I'm going to do is just display it. That's it. So the web component now is going to be responsible for not only styling itself, but it's going to be responsible for doing all the JavaScript. For when you click on the arrow key, it will expand and contract. So what about our CSS? Well, one of the things that we could take a look at is our old one here. Notice that we have our animal, span toggle, animal, article hide, animal. All of our CSS for our animal is defined here within our CSS file. This is from the previous one. What about our new one? There's animal list. That's it. Nothing else. So there's no CSS defined whatsoever in our CSS file. Again, why? Because it's inside of the web component file. So to actually get a web component, all we have to do is import it from whatever JavaScript file we've built it from, and then tell it that we have a new web component. In this case, we're using the custom elements global variable, a define method on it. We're saying, hey, whenever you see virtualvoid.animal, attach that to the virtualvoid.animal object that we have imported in. Now, whenever you're naming your custom elements, what you want to do is you always want to name them with some sort of name, dash, and some sort of other name. The reason you want to name them that way is that if you name them something like Virtualvoid, then a year or so down the road, the HTML people are going to say, hey, we're going to have a new element called Virtualvoid. You're going to have a conflict. The one thing the HTML people said is they will never have an element name that's going to have a dash in it. So always put a dash in your name of your HTML element. And I've called it VirtualVoidAnimal. So that's it. Our code is now a lot easier than it was before because everything's been moved into the JavaScript file. Let's take a look at it. Okay, here it is. The big thing here is that we always extend the HTML element. That's extraordinarily important. Now, there's also another way we can extend like the paragraph element and the input element. I may do another boring JavaScript on that one, but for now we're just going to keep it with its basic HTML element. But there are a couple of very important things you need to see here. First of all, constructor, we always have to call super. We also have to tell the system what attributes we're going to look at, and that's under a reserved getter called observed attributes. In this case, I'm reserving name, type, and description. That's going to become very important a little bit later on. So this is telling JavaScript that, hey, this particular custom element is going to have three attributes, name, type, and description. All right, I've defined a static variable called template in which I'm returning the template of my HTML. And this template matches exactly, let's go back down here. Did I save it down here? Yeah, I did. Here is our template. I will create manually the div, but here's the template within that div. So all I have to do is then just very simply just say, hey, this is the template. Is this a reserved variable? No, this is just something I've created just for my own personal benefit. I've now got a static styles in here too. And again, this is the name that I've given it. And here is my my CSS for my animal. And this is a direct, straight copy from my original one that I created in the last segment for this video. Animal header, animal collapse header, and all that. Now it is inside of a static getter called styles. And I'll show you how template and styles gets involved with everything. Alrighty, we'll get the process click here in a second. There are there's about 4 different callbacks that are used within a custom element. For the purposes of this video, I'm just going to concentrate on 2 of them. The first one is connected callback. And this is what will happen when when JavaScript has connected your custom element to the DOM. Once it does that, it's going to say, okay, we've got a new DOM here. What do we want to do with it? And this is where you're going to put all your initialization information within for your custom element. So within the connected callback, I have sat here and said, okay, I'm going to attach a shadow DOM. And this is very important. The shadow DOM is a specific DOM which basically says I'm going to encapsulate the CSS, the JavaScript, and the HTML for this custom element and not allow anybody to get in or out with an exception, which I'll tell you about here in just a second. Then I just created as I normally did. I created the div. I've added my class list. Here's where I typed in the inner HTML by using the Virtuoid animal template. So this is where I've brought in this template that I've defined here. So this just allows me very, very easily to define a template for all of my custom elements. Alrighty, where were we? Yep, here we go. So that was the template there. Here's where I add the listener for the click event. Just like I did in the original segment, I've got to be able to know when I've clicked on that arrow. And so I'm basically adding the click event here. All right, we then create an element called styles, and I put the text content as Virtuoid animal styles. So this is where I'm bringing in the styles. So I've brought in the HTML and I've brought in the styles. All right, I'm saving off I'm saving off my div, just make sure everything is okay. And then I'm going to call attribute change callback, which I'll get to in a second here, to set the initial values for name, type, and description. Then I append all that to the shadow root. And the shadow root is appended both the styles and the div. That gives me my HTML and my CSS, and that should display it up on the screen. So that's the connected callback. That's when it will call back when the DOM is available. The other one is the attribute change callback, and that's whenever an attribute that's on the custom element changes. That's one of these 3 attributes up here: name, type, and description. If any one of those 3 changes, it will call this up. Now, here's the problem. Because I'm constructing it here within the connected callback instead of within the constructor, and the reason I'm doing that because the DOM may not be available when we do a constructor, this ensures that DOM is available. It is possible that the attribute callback change can be called before the connected callback is changed. So what I've done here is I've done a quick little switch on the name, and I'm checking for name, type, and description. I do save them off, but in each one of these I check to make sure if there is an animal already created. If there is, then I'm going to change the text content for name, type, and description. So this just ensures that the DOM has already been built and available before attribute change callback the DOM is available by the time we get the new attribute values. It is possible that attribute change callback can be called before connected callback, and that's the reason I've done it that way, which is also the reason that I went ahead and called it here also within connected callback to ensure that, hey, if it got called before connected callback, I need to call it again so that now I have my DOM available, I can make the changes as needed. So that's the 2 very important of the 4, two of the very important callbacks you need to take care of. Connected callback, again, calls back whenever the custom element is connected to the DOM. An attribute changed callback is called whenever one of the attributes change. And that's pretty much it. The only thing here is the process click, which is right here. And that literally, almost literally, is exactly the same as the process click that we had here. The only difference is that within this process click, I'm looking for an ID. Well, now that everything is encapsulated within the shadow DOM, I don't need an ID anymore. I'm just going to go to my closest div. So if we go back up here, I'm now just getting my closest div animal, and if it's there, then I just go ahead and do all the class list, all the removes, all that kind of fun stuff. So that's pretty much it. So the idea here is that we've got our template, we've got our styles, we have our attributes, we have our connected callback where we actually build our HTML and our styles within the shadow root, and then we take care of any attributes that may happen to change, and that's pretty much it. So when we actually run, I'm going to do a Control F5, make sure I didn't mess up something. So when we actually run it, it works like a champ. But we need to make sure of one test. Remember in the first segment, let's go back. Remember in the first segment, we copied, there it is. We copied this over to our CSS file in order to prove to you that it's going to pollute our particular animal component. Well, so the same thing has happened again, is that somebody has come through and says, okay, my animal in the global style sheet is going to have a color green, a background color of white, and a font size of 2 rem. So they've added it to the web component CSS file, which is the main CSS file that we're loading in for this particular web page. But the difference we have now is that we are now loading in let's get back over to here. We're now loading in everything as a custom element, a web component, basically. So what happens if we put our animal with the green color and the large font size and the wrong background? Well, let's save it. Let's go over to F5. Let's go over to F5. Let's F5 it. Still works. Without a problem, it still works. And the reason is, again, because each one of these is its own web component. And so each one of them can, or have encapsulated, so each one of these is a web component, so each one has encapsulated its own CSS, its own JavaScript, and its own HTML. And so anything that's made into the outside style sheet won't affect what's inside. But there is one exception to the rule. In fact, there's a couple of exceptions. The really big one here is that CSS variables do get passed along. So if I happen to have a CSS variable within my web component, if you change that CSS variable at the global web page, that will filter its way on through to the web components. So you need to be careful with the CSS variables. If you have CSS variables within your web component that are defined outside of the web component, any changes outside the web component will affect inside of the web component itself. And that is the very basics of a web component. To be able to take all your CSS, your JavaScript, and HTML out of the main page and have everything all within that one web component. It just makes your designs and it makes your programming a lot easier. And that's all there is on web components. I hope you enjoyed our video. Hope I didn't bore you to death. Please make sure you click on the like button below and subscribe to this channel for more boring JavaScript videos. Also, you can go to www.boringjavascript.com to see everything that we've produced. Thanks again for watching, and we'll see you later.